Welcome to this webinar on predatory or problem publishers. These publishers are part of a growing phenomenon in digital publication and one which researchers need to learn about in order to safeguard both themselves and their future careers. In this session, we're going to cover the following topics. We'll start by looking at what a predatory publisher is and why the word predatory appears in inverted commas on the slide, why they're a problem for researchers, as well as why some people might consider them a legitimate business model, some warning signs to watch for, and a checklist that you can follow either as a librarian advising researchers or as someone looking to publish yourself. It's obviously a good idea to start any session like this with the definition, just so we're all on the same page moving through the rest of the webinar. Before we start, I just want to acknowledge that I know there are some problems with using the term predatory, as it has certain connotations that might not be completely appropriate to this term. We'll cover this in a bit more depth later on in the session, but I want to explain that I use it here as this is what these publishers are commonly known as, so it's likely to be the term that your researchers use when asking questions or when Googling the phenomenon. You might want to substitute the term problem publishers with your own research community. So there's no one concrete definition on what exactly a predatory publisher is, but they all follow similar patterns. On the screen there are 3 attempts at a definition. The first of these is from a librarian named Geoffrey Beale, who was the one that actually popularized the term predatory publishing. Beale was a scholarly communications librarian from Colorado who was aware of this problem, and he maintained a list of the publishers that he considered as problematic. As you can see from his definition on the screen, he considered them to be publishers who exploited the lack of understanding about what the gold model of open access was, where authors can pay to make their work open. It's important to note at this point that Beale's list, as it became known, wasn't without controversy itself. It was subject to several legal cases from publishers who appeared on the list but who didn't like being called predatory, and Beale actually ended up having to remove his list to avoid more problems. There's also another problem with any one person or institution maintaining any kind of blacklist of journals, because that list is in itself open to bias. Beale's list was, and if you know where to look, still is very popular, and it can be a problem when this represents just the opinions and judgments of the one person who's drawn up the list. The second definition comes from Peaches Udoma, and this is through the website for Open Access Week. And given the connection between predatory publishing and open access, I thought that that was an important one to include. And the final definition comes from Wikipedia. It provides a good all-round definition and is likely to be the one that most researchers will come across, as it's the one that comes up first on Google. This one expands slightly on the previous definitions and talks about the main business model for these publishers. Essentially, those who charge a fee without providing any of the services usually associated with that fee. One thing all of these definitions have in common is the word exploit, and this is the main perception of predatory publishers, that they're firms who are there to exploit researchers, exploit their misunderstandings, and trick them into publishing their work. As we go through this session, it's important to keep in mind that this is only one perception, and we'll come on to the opposing view later. So although these definitions all follow a similar theme, there are subtly different variations. One of the main problems with these publishers is that there's not one concrete definition which we can point everyone towards, as what's predatory to one person can seem like an acceptable business model to another. However, there are a few things that you can watch out for. Typically, these publishers will reach out to authors to solicit content via email. This usually starts just after a researcher has had something published for the first time, as this is when their name starts appearing in library catalogues, repositories, and other publication databases. Predatory publishers will trawl these databases looking for names and email out a generic invitation to publish or sit on an editorial board just out of the blue. As demonstrated by the Wikipedia definition, these publishers will charge authors for publication services like copy editing, which they then actually won't provide. They often call this an open access fee or a publication fee, and this can be confusing for researchers who will have grasped that they might need to pay for publication in some way, but they're unsure exactly why or how that works. The problem with this approach is that these predatory publishers accept content kind of as is without doing any further checks on it. In some cases, this means that typos and other small errors slip through, but in others, it's a much bigger problem. This work is being published and promoted as peer-reviewed academic research when it isn't. It could contain serious factual or other errors, which could have been spotted at the review stage, and this has implications for research integrity going forward. It's also misleading researchers who think they paid money towards some of these services, when in reality it's just being pocketed by the firm. Essentially, these titles are a form of vanity press, but the crucial difference is that they don't promote themselves as such. They claim to offer peer-reviewed academic research when in fact most of them just take payment to reproduce content as it's received. Researchers who need to publish and perish, which is a popular saying, are often very flattered that they've been asked to publish, but there are some hidden dangers to be aware of. So let's take a step back for a moment and think about the negative aspects of predatory publishers. Why is it that they're always framed as a problem? So as we've mentioned, these journals historically have exploited a lack of understanding about what open access publishing is. When it was first introduced, open access was, and for some people still is, very confusing. They were being told they needed to potentially pay a fee when sharing their work in order to make them compliant with both their funder mandates and any assessment exercises such as the REF. Even though people knew that they had to pay money, they weren't always sure what they were trying to pay money for, and some publishers took this as an opportunity to create titles which published work for a fee, which they claimed was an open access payment. So legitimate open access payments cover a range of things such as lost publisher revenue and editorial services. Although peer review itself is actually carried out for free, at some point the publisher needs to facilitate this, which is often included in the associated publication costs. One of the major reasons why predatory publishers are a problem is that they don't offer peer review, even when they claim to. Peer review is the main quality control procedure for academic research. Under the traditional system, an output is read through by experts in the field who will look at the quality of both the writing and the underlying work and assess the research for any problems. This gives publishers a chance to spot and correct errors before publication and helps preserve the integrity and quality of published academic work. The examples on the screen are articles which are taken from predatory publications. This first one describes in medical detail which part of the cell gives the Jedi their powers in Star Wars. This one outlines the impact of chocolate in breakfast cereals. And the last example is written by a few of the characters you might be familiar with in The Simpsons. Although these are quite intentionally funny examples, there's a serious point to showing them. The titles that these were published in claim that they only published high-quality peer-reviewed research, but obviously if they did, these articles would never have made it through to print. Not only does this perpetuate bad research, but it can also affect individual researchers. Even if their work is the best it can be, publishing in these predatory journals means that it's potentially sitting alongside work which is factually inaccurate, or published as a joke, or even just plain bad. This can have a negative impact on an individual's reputation, and at best means that they've lost the chance to publish it elsewhere. As with other types of publication, the researcher is likely to sign over the copyright to their work when they publish one of these titles. Even if they do subsequently discover that the title is predatory, there's very little they can do about it. Thinking about how much work goes into an article or other output, it seems a shame that the researcher can't then publish it somewhere better. Although rare, publication with these titles has sometimes meant that researchers sustain long-term damage to their reputation, and citations from these titles certainly add nothing to an academic CV. Some predatory publishers have other tactics which can impact a researcher's reputation. This is a screenshot of the editorial board of a journal which was looking to recruit researchers to join them or to publish with them. To encourage them, it gives a list of members together with their contact details, which I've removed, and their research interests. This is fairly standard with any regular journal editorial board. However, there are a couple of problems with this particular board, and I want to draw your attention to the 3 individuals circled on the screen. So this example was actually reported to me by someone who found it online and recognized some of the images. Mnua Pakaskevas is actually Dr. Rachel Coop, the head of academic planning at Cambridge. And Ralph Haysin is actually Stephen Toop, who's the Vice Chancellor of Cambridge. This triggered some alarm bells, and I did some more digging and found that Samuel Vesnin is actually a stock photo of a man holding a business card, so I doubt that he's on the editorial board either. This is one example of the lengths some publishers will go to trick researchers into publishing with them. They take photos they find online and make up people for their non-existent editorial boards. There have also been examples where real researchers and academics have been listed as on boards when they've never actually heard of the journal. And these are all tactics to enhance the reputation of an unscrupulous publisher. Another tactic for researchers to be wary of is the predatory conference. Many publishers are branching out into events where they'll invite people to speak and to chair sessions at various events held around the world. Often the attendee will be paying for their own attendance, only to find that when they get there, that there are 6 other conferences by the same publisher being held in the same airport hotel, and the only attendees are other people who've been invited to present. These events have little or no academic merit and a complete waste of time and opportunity and money. These publishers have been a growing problem for years, but word is spreading and people are starting to take notice of some of the less savoury practices. One of the largest problem publishers is the Omics Publishing Group, which operates a number of journal titles and conferences. Over the years, there have been complaints from researchers about poor practices and the fact that events offered by the group are less than professional. In April 2019, a case came to court in the US, and a judge ruled that Omics were guilty of deceiving researchers by falsely including them on editorial boards and encouraging them to publish in journal titles which didn't offer the services they claimed to. As you see on the screen, the company was ordered to pay $50 million in damages to the researchers involved. But as the company is based in India and the ruling was in the US, it's unclear if any money will actually change hands. It does at least help to raise awareness of problem practices. It's also one of the biggest legal judgments on this type of practice, and therefore it does set a precedent which others can hopefully follow in the future. In the interest of balance, we need to look at the other side of the argument. Not all of these publishers operate the kind of predatory tactics we've been talking about, and some people consider that they are actually providing a service which is very much needed, something which might seem a bit strange in the context of the previous section of this webinar. So firstly, we need to think about the researchers' individual circumstances, including where in the world they're based. There's an argument to be made that researchers at some institutions have more resources to support legitimate publication. Taking the University of Cambridge as an example, there are people across the university dedicated to providing training and advice on every aspect of the publication process, so researchers have every opportunity to learn about how to avoid these problems. Smaller institutions might not be able to offer their researchers this level of support, especially if they're based in countries which don't have a lot of money. Researchers in countries with developing educational ecosystems such as Africa and parts of Asia are producing fantastic work, but they often fall victim to predatory publishers as they just don't know the signs to watch for. The country context also plays an important part in a researcher's motivation to publish. In some countries, they need to have at least 1 or more publications on their CV in order to progress in their careers, and so it almost makes sense for them to use one of these publishers to get their work out there. Different systems of reward for academic work lead to different behaviours in researchers, and we need to make sure we're not just looking at it through the lens of our own bias. If a researcher just needs to have their work published to progress, but they don't really care how or where, and they're prepared to pay, then is using one of these publishers such a problem? Following a traditional route to publication means waiting ages for peer review, facing the possibility of rejection before finally finding someone willing to publish. In these circumstances, you might argue that paying for publication is acceptable. This sort of argument leads to some people saying that what these publishers are actually doing is fulfilling a need for some researchers, and that this is just a new business model which is part of the changing publication landscape. I'll leave you to explore the evidence and reach your own conclusions about whether you think that these publishers deserve to be called predatory or not. However you view these publishers, it always pays to be cautious and assess any offer to publish that you or your researchers might receive. There are some warning signs to watch out for which might lead researchers to think again about any potential approach. These general signs will probably be familiar to anyone who's published before, but early career researchers looking to share their work for the first time often fall foul of some of them. One handy resource which you can point them to is the website Think, Check, Submit, which outlines all of the potential problems to watch out for and gives some really handy advice. As we talked about earlier in the webinar, predatory publishers often send out mass emails to researchers offering to publish their work. These emails tend to be overly flattering, contain a lot of language like, "You're one of the most eminent scholars in your field," or "We would be so excited to publish your groundbreaking work." To researchers who are eager to make their mark, or those who've been through a lot of rejections, this can be an extremely tempting offer. This flattering language might set alarm bells ringing, however, as many publishers opt for a more professional tone. But again, we shouldn't forget potential cultural differences. If English is not someone's first language, then they might use phrasing that native English speakers would find strange, and so don't judge any invitations too harshly on that alone. Another sign of a potential problem is a publisher who produces titles covering a vast range of topics. Some of these predatory firms claim to publish on anything from astronomy to zoology and traffic management to library studies. It's common to see publishers expanding their subject coverage, but they usually have some type of relation to each other, and if it's not, this is explained. If a publisher is offering an extensive list of diverse titles, then that may indicate that they're more interested in making money from all the fees they can collect, rather than publishing the best quality research. Asking for any type of submission fee might be another indication of a problem. Open access fees are increasingly common, but other types of fee that are asked for should start to raise a red flag. These are often referred to as hidden fees, which can be, obviously by their nature, quite hard to spot. Publishers should be upfront about any fees, and details should be available on their website. If this isn't the case, then researchers should email the publisher to check any potential fees prior to signing paperwork. The final warning sign to watch for is the major giveaway with predatory publishers, publication turnaround times that appear too good to be true. This is especially important if the publisher claims to be offering peer review, as if done properly, it takes time. It's not uncommon to see predatory publishers offering acceptance of a manuscript at the start of the week and claiming it can be reviewed, copy edited, and published by the weekend. The bottom line is that if something seems too good to be true, then it probably is. What follows for the rest of the webinar is a checklist that researchers and librarians can use to identify potential problem publishers. Before we go on, there's one small caveat to this list, and that's that none of the factors should be taken in isolation, as there might be very good reasons why a publisher will fail on one or more criteria. In fact, it's been pointed out that if this checklist and other criteria were used to assess what we know to be legitimate publishers, they're also likely to fail on at least 1 or 2 points. Publishers should be open and transparent about their practices, both as a way to encourage new submissions and as part of protecting research integrity. This includes contact information, hopefully to an official-looking address, as well as an outline of how it operates, the topics it covers, and why these have been chosen. Any invitation to publish work or attend a conference should be professional and come from a named individual with an official email address. Offers coming from accounts such as Gmail or Yahoo should be treated with caution because they can just be set up by anybody. It's not unheard of for these publishers to clone the names of established journals to fool people into sending in work. But if this name comes attached to a generic email address, this should give you cause for concern. It's also a good idea to look and see if the range of topics that this publisher publishes on to see whether that makes some kind of sense. In a similar way, any fees the author is expected to cover should be clearly explained and easy to find on a website. If researchers need to click through 7 pages to find information on fees, this might indicate that the publisher is either trying to hide something or that they're just really bad at website design. Authors should also be wary of any hidden fees that crop up in a publication agreement. For example, the need to purchase a certain number of copies of the finished product. This has caught out many researchers who then find that they're legally obliged to pay out. Open access publishing often allows authors to keep the copyright to their work whilst granting permission for the publisher to reproduce it. This is done by assigning an open license of some type, and sometimes these are stipulated by those funding the research. Any publisher should outline the rights of the author in a publication agreement, including if a Creative Commons license is allowed. It's important that researchers make sure that any license complies with the expectations of their funder requirements, or they might find themselves in hot water. As we've discussed, one of the main issues with predatory publishers is their lack of peer review. The process used for review, including predicted timescales, should be outlined by the publisher, and researchers should always make it a point to look at these. There are several different types of peer review, from double-blind to open, and the type that's used needs to be explained. Make sure that any timescales mentioned are realistic. It's impossible to carry out decent peer review overnight, so researchers should be cautious, no matter how desperate they are to get something in print. Short timescales might indicate that there is little or no peer review taking place, and this should mean alarm bells. It's also a good idea to make sure that any metrics like the journal impact factor that have been given are correct, as again it's not unusual for these journals to inflate or even make up numbers to make themselves sound more impressive. As we saw earlier in the webinar, it's all too easy to create a fake editorial board for a journal, so it pays to double check names if researchers are in any doubt. This can often be done with a quick online search or even a reverse image search if they think there might be a problem. Editorial board members should be listed along with a named editor-in-chief who has the overall responsibility for the journal title. These names might be familiar to others in the same field, and they're likely to list their affiliation on their own website if it's legitimate. Don't be afraid to contact editorial board members if you believe there's a problem. Board members are often happy to answer general queries about the journal, and in fact it's part of their role. This can also be a good way to check that these people know they're listed on the board, although that question should be approached with a level of caution rather than just emailing a stranger and asking them. Some publishers are connected to recognised institutions such as a university press or an established institution, and this can provide a lot of reassurance for the nervous researcher. If there is a link to a legitimate organisation, chances are the publisher is also legitimate. But it's a good idea to remember that some journals falsely claim a link, and others will clone names to trick researchers. For example, the Journal of Biology will become the American Journal of Biology or the International Journal of Biology to encourage those familiar with the original title to submit. Most publications have some form of web presence, and this is often where researchers can get a lot of information about the journal. Professional journals should have a correspondingly professional web presence, and researchers can use this and any emails to assess whether they would be willing to publish with the title. Errors in spelling and grammar might indicate a problem, but researchers should again remember cultural differences. What looks polished and professional to someone from a Western institution might be out of reach for those in other countries or those titles which are just starting out. As with membership of a recognised association, having a publisher or a journal appear in a recognised database can help to reassure researchers. If the researcher is happy with the criteria for inclusion in the database, then they should be happy with that particular title. Some newer titles will not yet be indexed in the typical databases in the field, as these take time to build up, but researchers can always look at titles by the same publisher to see if those have been included. Perhaps the biggest indication of whether the publisher is predatory is the quality of their previous work. Researchers should look at other titles and individual works produced by a publisher to see if this would be something they would read and cite, and whether they would be happy to have their own work published alongside it. Poorly written or factually incorrect content may not be something that a researcher would want to be associated with. Researchers and librarians should also look at the titles and abstracts of the work to test for errors in terminology which might indicate that the publishers were not familiar with the field. If this had happened at the review stage for the Star Wars article we looked at earlier, it would never have made it through to publication. Researchers can also obviously search online for the name of the title and the word predatory to see if other people have complained about that work. As with any other online review, it pays to do some proper investigation rather merely than taking it. In conclusion, the best thing you can do when dealing with predatory or problem publishers is to trust your judgment. No matter how new researchers or librarians are to this area, they will know when something doesn't feel right. If something feels wrong, then chances are that it probably is, so always listen to that little voice at the back of your head. This webinar has hopefully given you some tools and techniques to make up your own mind and use your own judgment about individual publishers, which can help you to avoid all types of problem publisher in the future. Thanks for watching.